Hello, everyone, and welcome to this event on Iran. I'm ANISEH TABRIZI. I lead the MENA program and I'm a senior research fellow at RUSI, as well as an associate researcher at ISPI. So I'm very pleased to moderate this joint panel, which is organized in partnership for the series year-long initiative, which will lead us to the 9th edition of Rome Med. This is the annual conference on the Mediterranean region, which is co-promoted by ISPI and the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. And the date for the coming session will be the 2 to the 4th of November in Rome. So we look forward to seeing you there. But until now, we'll have a series of this conversation online. The goal for today's panel is really to have a deep dive into Iran's calculations, thinking, and perception, especially in light of the number of important developments which we have seen over the past 6 months. The demonstration which have been triggered by the killing of Mahsa Amini while in custody, and which have evolved into broader anti-government demonstration, but also the stall of the nuclear talks back in the summer and the progressive escalation on the nuclear front we have been seeing over the past few months. And last but definitely not least, also the growing relations with Russia, in particular through military cooperation between the two, which, among other things, has also led to the provision of drones by Iran to Russia in its war in Ukraine. So this and a lot more is to be covered in this session. And I know that it's a lot, but I'm very pleased to say that we have an excellent panel, which is based in Tehran, and which will help us get through some of the most pressing questions which you and I have on these issues. With us today, we have FERESHTEH SADEGHI, who is a former journalist based in Tehran. We also have Professor NASSER HADIAN, who is a professor of political science at the University of Tehran. And we also have KAYAHN BARZEGAR, who is, among other things, a senior academic advisor to the IPIS. Welcome, and thanks for joining us. First, I would start with you with a look at the domestic situation. Obviously, as I mentioned, there have been months of protests, and the crackdown exerted by the security forces have been in the news for many, many months now. And obviously, in the recent months, we have seen an erosion of state-society relations, but also questions really about what the impact of this demonstration is and has been and will be on the future and stability of the Islamic Republic, as well as these state-society relations. So this is a question that I want to pose to you, and we would like really your opinion on, what next? What have been the implication of this demonstration? What is the future of state-society relation? Are we likely to see more demonstrations, more rifts within the society and in the legitimacy of the Islamic Republic?
Hello to you and to your audience. Thank you very much for having me. Look, the situation now, after several months of protest, I can say it is calm. But at the same time, we can never guarantee that this calm will persist for example, next 1, 2, or 3 years. So it depends on the situation, on the treatment of the government and state as a whole with the people. It seems that about the parole or the amnesty that was issued by Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, for many people, many prisoners, including those who were arrested or who were supposed to stand trial for their attendance in the protest or for their damaging property, what else? But in general, for attending these protests, it has somehow calmed down the society. It had its effect, though some people, they may say that no, it was totally useless, but I think it had its own effect. And at the same time, I think given that we are very nearing the new Iranian year, so maybe politically speaking, the situation is somehow calm. People are thinking about the New Year preparations, and maybe after the New Year, and then immediately after the New Year, it is the holy month of Ramadan. And maybe if they want to start new activities, it starts after that. Speaking about the stability of the Islamic Republic, or in the long term, I think these protests, they don't have any effect on the Islamic Republic's stability. Can they bring down the Islamic Republic to its knees? No. But can they make troubles for the authorities? Yes, they can.
Thank you very much, and I'm sure we'll come back to some of these issues during the Q&A as well. I should have mentioned, by the way, you are welcome to send the questions, and I'll open up to the question after going into a first round of question to the speakers myself. Nasser, obviously, right before the protest started, there has been also a stall situation for the nuclear talks on the JCPOA restoration of so-called Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. And the sense in European capitals, but also in the US, has largely been that the halt in the talks has been due to Iran's requests, a reasonable request. This has been the definition, but also potentially a lack of interest by Iran, even in reaching a deal, which has been even more voiced after the demonstration started. So I guess my question to you is, has there been an impact of this demonstration on the nuclear issue? And has there been really thinking about Iran about starting again, reprising talks at all?
Short answer is to some extent, yes. They have been important in basically impacting the mindsets of major decision makers in Iran. That should be, what should we do? There have been a debate all along. How should we approach the JCPOA, since United States, due to domestic politics of itself, withdrew from the JCPOA. So for a while, when President Biden came to power, Iran was willing to go back, but President Biden basically was hesitant at the beginning for assessing or re-evaluating or whatever for about 3-4 months. And then once they were ready, of course, Iran welcomed it, but that was a little bit late because we had the presidential election and the new team was very much critical of what has happened before. They were very much critical of, particularly the chief negotiator, Ali Bagheri, was very much critical of the JCPOA all along. Thus, now they are in power. For a while, they waited. They could not go back very quickly due to domestic politics of Iran. But once they did, basically they concluded a deal, which I can say was not fundamentally different from what was concluded by Abbas Araghchi, the former chief negotiator. So it was politically costly inside Iran if they wanted to basically to go with that particular text which they agreed on. But it took some time also until they made their mind that, okay, they wanted it. They had a couple of questions, which were, to me, they were legitimate questions, and that was regarding the continuity of the deal. Can we be sure that the next US president is going to abide by the JCPOA, the newly agreed JCPOA? So a lot of people, including myself, argue no, because they have said, they have said in their campaign from now, in fact, from a year ago, that the first day the Republicans are talking about, the first day they come to power, they're going to tear any agreements up, and they are not going to abide by the law, by the agreement. Thus, there was some hesitancy that is it beneficial for us to go for the deal? Can we benefit from the deal? As someone who has concentrated on the deal for long time, what I said was, what I basically said, it's going to be basically a trade deal. It is not going to be a trade and investment. We have to forget about investment. The original JCPOA was about trade and investment. The RAG sanction relief was supposed to help us in both, basically in both fields. But under such circumstances, it was almost impossible to believe that there is going to be investment as well. Demonstration also added more uncertainty to the situation. That okay, who's going to invest in Iran under such a circumstances? And that decision was to some extent political and to some extent economical decision, risk associated with both politics and economy. But right now, basically, I can say there are minority forces, both in US and in Iran and Europe, who wants the deal, and they think that there is no alternative to JCPOA. But unfortunately, majority in all the countries, basically US, Europe, Iran, they don't want the deal. They think that's not a good deal, that would not serve our interest. So I stop here, and in case if there's more question, I can go in more detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Nasser. I'm sure there will be more questions. KAYAHN, on top of obviously a lot of coverage on the demonstration, but also on the state of the nuclear talks, there has been a lot of coverage on Iran-Russia relations, in particular in the aftermath of the news about Iran providing drones to Russia, which Russia has used in its war in Ukraine. So my question to you really is, what have been the calculations in Tehran to provide these drones, and generally speaking, to intensify its relations with Russia over the past few months? Ukraine is not traditionally an area of priority for Iran. It doesn't feature into its traditional strategic calculation, but it featured as such over the past year or so. And obviously that has been the cause of a lot of concerns, especially in European capitals, but also in the US. So can you explain a little bit what's the thinking in Iran, why they have been going for that kind of policy, what's in it, and what is the likely trajectory of Russia and Iran relation? I know it's a big question, but hopefully you can address it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everybody. Thanks for having me. I think the reality is that Iran wants to kind of balance between its conduct of foreign policy, that is, its traditional neutrality that has been announced by the Iranian government, and at the same time doing a timing, weapons deal with Russia that could not have happened, in an ordinary situation. The government, of course, is saying that it has given these drones before the war. It has been the matter of technological exchange and weapon exchange that has been traditionally going on between Iran and Russia for many years. That's why we cannot deduct Iran's Russia relations to the Ukrainian war. The two sides have had relations on many broader matters, but again, the reality, in my belief, is that Iran wants to take advantage of this historical moment and get some sophisticated weapons that are key for Iran in terms of securing its security in broader terms. Therefore, I think the key word here is to somehow strengthen Iran's deterrent power when it goes to the weapons deal. But again, I'm saying that this is a kind of debate that has polarized Iranian domestic politics, that Iran should stay in its nuclear, traditional neutrality that has been meaning, for Iranian in the Iranian history. But again, how to balance it? It's very sensitive, because we know that the Ukrainian war is very sensitive for the Western countries. It's an identical issue. In that sense, I would say that the two sides are perceiving this crisis with different methodology. From the Iranian perspective, it's a political security matter, and enhancing relations with its traditional friends that helped Iran in a hard time, crisis time. But for the European, it's a matter of identical matters to not letting Russia to win this war. So this is also a kind of convergence between the two sides. At the same time, the Iranian government is saying that it has been exaggerated because these drones are not really game changers of the war, and the Western countries have taken advantage of connecting this drone issue to other issues and trying to isolate Iran and connect Iran with Russia. A kind of combination of authoritarian regime, so-called authoritarian regime with nuclear capability somehow, that can bring a kind of fear and isolation for the two countries. But again, if we put it in a broader and in a general thing, countries can have weapons deal and at the same time preserve their neutrality. We had this, for instance, in Iran-Iraq war. Even Russia supported many weapons to Iraq in that war while it was neutral. And even interestingly, that Ukraine was a part of the Soviet in that time, and a lot of plants, weapons plants, were located in Ukraine, and many of those weapons went to Iraq in that war. Interestingly, therefore, another argument for the government is that we can do weapons deal and at the same time keep our neutrality. But right now, there is a big debate inside Iran, and the government of Iran is trying to somehow ease the situation, trying to convince the Ukrainian authority that Iran is neutral and will stay neutral. And Iran is trying to explain more that what is going on the drones issues. But my last point is that sometimes when it goes to Iran's Russia relations, sometimes mutual threat can bring a stronger cooperation rather than mutual interest somehow. Iran and Russia feels that they need each other, and this is a mutual need and expectations from each other. And they have broader other issues like energy cooperation and anti-terrorism strategy, intelligence, artificial intelligence cooperation, exchange of technology, other things. Therefore, Iran and Russia are going to continue their cooperation on different broader issues. And one of those issues is, weapons exchange, which I think Iran will be interested to go ahead with that. And of course, this is not just exchange of weapon, rather it is exchange of technology. Iran is expected to get the technology and install the plant in Iran on even production of the Su-35, for instance, fighter jet and other matters that are going on between the two sides. So my point is that neutrality is a principle in Iranian foreign policy conduct, and in the Iranian domestic politics, it has a lot of proponents. But at the same time, the government has other security and political issues of cooperation with Russia that is currently trying to balance between these two principles.
Thanks a lot, KAYAHN. And again, I'm sure that on the Russia-Iran front, there is much more to discuss. But we know that one of the consequences of this political choice by Iran has been, together with obviously developments on the nuclear front and developments on the domestic front, the imposition of additional sanctions against Iran. So I guess one question, FERESHTEH, that would be useful to get your view on is, what has been the impact of these sanctions for the population, in your opinion? Have we seen, a strong impact, especially over the past 6 months, or is this, more of the same?
Okay.
You're asking
You know,
to
she's asking me. The sanctions, they have, I think the most important effect of sanctions is that they make people poorer and also the government poorer. So when the government doesn't have enough money, because sanctions are mostly on energy sector, Iran's oil and gas sector, petrochemical products. So when the money from oil revenues or energy sector revenues don't come back to the country, the government is not able to meet its promises, whatever it has promised to people. So it can only make ends meet. It can only pay the, for example, civil servants, but it is not able to improve the reconstruction, for example, of some old infrastructure of the country. So as the result, both the government and people will be somehow dissatisfied, but the dissatisfaction usually is seen more among the people. And one of the direct impacts of sanctions, which doesn't allow the Iranian government easily bring back oil revenues, now we see them in the term of economy, which nowadays Iranian forex market is really turbulent. The exchange rate between the Iranian rial and the US dollar has gone its all-time high. So when you talk to people on the street in Bazaar, yesterday I was in the Grand Bazaar of Tehran, everybody is complaining. Some people are nagging. It depends on how well off they are. If they are rich, I say they are nagging. If they are not from the rich class, so I say they are complaining about the economy. And that's the most important, I think, aim of the sanctions, and the US or the Western countries, but mostly the US who imposed these sanctions, they knew exactly what would be the effects of these sanctions.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Nasser, I mean, sorry, KAYAHN.
No problem. No, nothing.
Okay. So, yeah, Nasser, I was wondering whether you can tell us a little bit about, the role of sanctions into the Iranian calculation on the nuclear front. In particular, like one of the tools that the E3 and the US have been threatening to use is the snapback, right? The reimposition of all sanctions. Are these threats effective in affecting Iranians' calculation at all, or Iran is not really concerned about the impact of these additional sanctions, and therefore their calculation on the nuclear front are not affected by the threat of snapback?
First of all, regarding the sanctions, so it was the main principle that Iran agreed to JCPOA. Otherwise, why we should accept to limit the exercise of our rights under the NPT and the safeguard agreements. Why we have to do it? We did it. We agreed to limit the exercise of our rights in order to get sanction release. Thus, if we are not going to get it, there's no point for Iran to basically abide by this agreement. But to what extent then the threat of a snapback is important? I don't want to say it is not important, but the point is already the sanctions are there. What extra things can UN Security Council sanctions bring back? Particularly considering that Russia and China would oppose it, though they cannot stop it. That's almost an automatic mechanism. So that's why we call it the snapback mechanism. So they can do it. They can do it, they can bring it back, but the legitimacy is not going to be the same as before. Thus, to me, in the calculus of strategic decision makers in Tehran, they don't want the snapback mechanism. What if it happens? So they think it is not going to create a lot more. It's going to create somehow more pressure, but not a lot more. But on the other side, what Iran has already informed the European is, in case if you do that, in case if the UN Security Council resolutions come back to force, then Iran not only is going to withdraw from the JCPOA, but rather is going to withdraw from the NPT altogether. And they are going to go for what I have already called constructive ambiguity. Constructive ambiguity refers to the state that the other side, here means basically West, should guess what Iran is doing. Because no inspectors, no monitoring, no cameras, nothing. So they have to guess what Iran is doing. Then that would to me that would automatically escalate to a situation which is going to be extremely dangerous, because then particularly the West and I can say particularly the US and in general the West would feel that they have to credibilize their threat. They're going to bring some armament, some aircraft carriers, so forth and so on in the region. And Iran is going to basically get a regional military posture, which would indicate to everyone if there is going to be accident or an intentional act of war, it is going to be a regional war. It is not going to be Iran-US war. It is not going to be only basically destroying our nuclear sites. It's going to be a regional war, which would involve Saudi Arabia, UAE, Israel, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Iran, Iraq. So then in the strategic calculus of the other side and Iranians, they have to think, does it worth? Are we better off to go for such an uncertain situation? Or no, still possibly, arguably, we are all better off to go back to the JCPOA. Thank you.
Thank you for this doomsday scenario, I would say. Yeah, I think it's important to consider the likely possibility of escalation, because it's something that it's more and more talked about as a possibility of diplomacy breaking down. So I think it's definitely worth also, looking into the cost of the JCPOA not being longer an option, diplomacy no longer be an option, and what that would mean for escalation. So thanks.
Anise, if you want to put it in one sentence, the best hope for the revival of the JCPOA is the lack of alternative or the presence of such alternatives.
Thanks, Nasser. But, coming back to this regional potential escalation, I mean, KAYAHN, coming to you, like on the regional front, one of the rationale of sanction and imposition of sanction is also often raised as, the potential for curtailing Iran's ability to project its power in the region, to support proxies and allies in the region, so impose very high costs, right? But I think there is still a question about, on one side, thinking that is actually the case, and on the other side, seeing Iran being able to, as we discussed, increase its relations with Russia, provide military capability to Russia, and intensify relations with the other countries across the region as well. So I guess one question that everybody is asking itself, at least I am, is Iran overstretched because of sanction, or does it feel powerful? And how much of this has to do with the potential of military escalation and the potential preparation for a military escalation with regional countries and beyond?
Well, if I can follow with what Nasser mentioned, escalations is itself the continuation of diplomacy. If you put it in Iran's nuclear negotiations, the blame lands on the Western side that, withdrew from the nuclear deal. I mean, the Trump administration, pushing Iran to go towards advancing its nuclear program in a way. So it doesn't mean that necessarily any escalation leads to war, but rather escalations might, somehow bring a kind of balance for negotiations, backing to the negotiation table. In the case of Iran, I think any escalations could go in that direction. But on the regional issues, because of its geopolitical superiority, it is in the conduct of Iranians' style and Iranians, foreign policy that region is very much important, and Iran cannot afford to somehow preempt itself from its levels of influence and power in the regional affairs. Therefore, any, including of, for instance, regional issues or change of behavior of Iran, or even including Iran's missiles program in the negotiations, that was the logic behind the Trump administration for withdrawing from the deal, is invalid, because sometimes if you preempt a country from its conventional deterrent power, then you can put that country towards unconventional kind of deterrent power. Therefore, I would say that Iran will keep its influence in the region, will be more active, but at the same time, and it was said by the Iranian officials that Iran is ready to settle the regional issues for the sake of regional stability, not for the sake of Western interest, for the sake of Iran's own interest at the first time and regional interest, to go in the direction that to settle some crisis, for instance, in Yemen, in Syria, in post-conflict Iraq, and even in Afghanistan, to be honest. But bringing this argument that Iran changing its behavior in the regional, issues is something doesn't fit with the Iranian understanding of regional problems, because what is being said by the Western side or some Arab countries' side, that Iran is expanding its influence in the region, on the Iranian side is being translated as regional problems, because we had wars, we had instability, we had Daesh, we had Al-Qaeda, all of them anti-Iranian forces, and Iran needs to be powerful in its immediate border to protect its security in a broader sense. Therefore, the region is a constant in Iranian foreign policy conduct. It cannot be weakened in terms of deterring the threats in Iranian security political mindset. Therefore, I would say that Iran will go ahead with that, but at the same time, Iran would try to balance its regional, policies for the sake of bringing constructive regional dialogue. Right now, I'm sure that you might ask this. Right now, there are a lot of regional dialogue between Iran and its neighbors, between Iran, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and other countries. Therefore, we are witnessing a new wave of, regional cooperation that is coming around to the regional politics.
Why don't you expand on that point? Because I was actually going to ask you as the next question. So you read my mind about, the state of, in particular, GCC, but Saudi Arabia in particular, Iran relation. Obviously, there has been, promising developments in the past year with 5 rounds of direct talks mediated by Iraq. But more recently, there has been a halt on that talks because of multiple reasons, domestic situation, but also the new Iraqi government and more. So I think, one question that, again, would be important to address is, what are we likely to see on the Saudi-Iran front in light also of the Abraham Accords and broader regional development? Are we likely to see escalation on that front, or do you think a reprisal of that dialogue and potential improvement of relation is actually still in the cards?
No, I mean, whatever is happening would not lead, in my belief, to a kind of direct war or tensions between, between countries or regional countries, because that would be very costly for all. Instability will be, costly for all countries, at the top of them for Iran, because we are encircled by anti-Iranian forces. I mean, asymmetric forces that, for instance, terrorist groups that has been, echoing their voices by anti-Iranian movement in Iranian border. But to be honest, I think 2 main geopolitical developments brought a new kind of dynamics for, affecting regional dynamics. One is the U.S. U.S. troops withdrawal from Afghanistan, which was a big, move or translation for regional countries that they can no longer count on the U.S. guarantee, and there has been some kind of frustration, leading them to think of the fact that they need to count on their own self and their own capacity, or they go towards regional cooperation. And that dynamic has led, these countries, Persian Gulf countries, to go and explore, dynamics of dialogue with Iran. That's why we see UAE has returned its ambassador. Saudi Arabia is now willing more to talk with Iran. And the second dynamic has been the Ukrainian war. The Ukrainian war has somehow has given the region this opportunity to choose between the Western Front and not the Eastern Front or the Russian Front. And in this election, I would say that the regional countries has chosen to count on their own, foreign policy. Right now, the regional countries are affecting the Ukrainian war. Of course, the Ukrainian war polarized. Every country is either being in the side of the West or in the side of Russia, which is bad. But at the same time, I think the regional countries have found an opportunity to cooperate between each other, because for the first time, they can play their own role and manage even the crisis by being, competent in their role playing, like, Iran, Turkey, Saudi Arabia. Many countries are doing that. Therefore, I think that the new dynamic has led the regional countries to further cooperation, because this is the determination of geography. Geography matters with the Ukrainian war, the connectivity of the crisis and interlinkages between different crises. For instance, we have the Caucasus crisis that is linked with, other issues of the Middle East. Therefore, I would say that, new dynamics, new geopolitics that leads and make us being more optimistic about a new wave of regional cooperation.
Thank you very much, KAYAHN. FERESHTEH, a lot of talks about, like Iran's relation with Russia, but also more recently, Iran-China relation, and now a question from the audience about Iran's possible membership to the BRICS. So I guess, one question that we still would want to address is really the perception from Iranians about these relations. In the past, there have been, debates, I would say, to the least, some pushback, some negative reaction when it came to potential strengthening of Iran relation with Russia, Iran relation with China, potential look east policy in general. Like relations with the Taliban. We have seen a negative reaction, for instance, in the past when there have been delegations visiting Tehran. What's the debate now? Is, the population basically okay with what is going on and, with the lack of alternative of strengthening relation with the West, they are basically, green lighting this? Or is there still an internal debate about this?
Iran is a very polarized society. So some people are, we can say, pro-reformists, pro-moderates, in the latest example is pro-President Rouhani, Foreign Minister Zarif, former Foreign Minister. And the other camp, which we call them hardliners or conservatives, are the ones who brought President Raisi to power. So all of them, they usually, whatever ideas they have, they are most of the time against each other. So if the other camp, which we call it the hardliners who are in power, if they propagate look east policy, the other side criticizes them. But the fact is that the US's withdrawal from the JCPOA in 2018 left Iran with no choice but to go towards east, or what we call it east, but China, Russia, some maybe independent countries such as the BRICS. And Iran, sometimes you have no choice. You have to run your country, you have to run the affairs of your country, your foreign policy, and you can't wait for the West until the, I don't know, the doomsday to asking them to come back or to making concessions. So this is number one. About Taliban, when it comes to the Taliban is we can say it's a reality in Afghanistan. Yes, it is not the entire reality of Afghanistan, but it is something that nobody can denies that. And the group is now running the country. And because Iran has a very long border with Afghanistan, the only thing that Iran can do is to not cooperate, but at least interact with the Taliban, because they can't start a war. There are many Afghans who are living in Iran. So even when it comes to the Taliban, some critics of the current government, usually they point to the Taliban, they are radical or fundamental. Okay, everybody knows that they are fundamentals, but at this point, Iran has no choice but to interact with them, to help them cover their country better, because somehow we can say Iran's have been met. Iran has met its in Afghanistan when it comes to Tajik, when it comes to the Shia Hazara in Afghanistan. And about the foreign policy, yes, Iran, as I said, the US withdrawal from the nuclear deal left Iran with no choice but to continue with is possible. And now for the time being, that it is right that because of the Ukraine war, also in Iran, it's a mutual relationship. We can say it is on Iran. Is Russia no relationship? We know that instead of the drones that it has already given to Russia has agreed to Iran some soy fighter jets, and we know that Iran's Air Force needs jets. So we can say it's a mutual relation. When it comes to China, it is also the same. Actually, with China, there are criticism because most of the times the government seems somehow act secretively when it comes to Russia, China. Not blaming China. Argument is the government is that China doesn't want the secrets between the trade secrets between the two countries to be revealed to the media. So one of the so when it comes to the critics, the government write to them about relation China, but in general, I think for the next few years, maybe 2 or 3 years at least, until the end of President Raisi's first term, I think we will see more cooperation between Iran. Between Tehran and Moscow, rather than, for example, Tehran and European capitals.
Thank you, FERESHTEH. And we had some technical issues, but I hope that the audience could hear most of your remarks. Nasser, last question for you, as we are unfortunately at the end of our session. It comes from Barbara Levin, which I know that you're familiar with, from the Stimson Center. She asks, what are the chances of a less for less deal of Iran capping 60% enrichment in return for limited sanction relief, and also for prisoners release? So on this question, Nasser, your last words.
Thank you. Salam, Barbara. Hope you are doing fine. Regarding less for less, we have been working on that, as you may know. But still, personally, I'm not convinced that we have to quit the JCPOA. I've decided myself to still push for the JCPOA for the next 2 months. Then I would go for the alternative, which there is a 3 steps alternative, basically. A gesture for gesture, which may include not exactly what you said, capping the 60%, because when I ask Kelsey, for instance, what is the most important issue for America, if you are going to ask one issue that regarding the nuclear program, nuclear agreement, Iran should observe, what would that issue be? She said, that's bringing back the cameras. In other words, mostly concentrating on monitoring and inspection rather than capabilities, which would include the 60%. Thus, gesture for gesture means one gesture by US, one gesture by Iran. So I've already said that, okay, what US wants, we know, but what Iran wants exactly in the area of sanctions, we are still working on that. That would be one step, gesture for gesture. Then we are going to go for freeze as a second step. Freeze for freeze, the way I have defined it is prevention from escalation. We don't want to escalate, but we are not going to cut anything. US is going to keep its sanctions, and we are going to continue to do whatever we are doing. We just don't increase it. We don't escalate. Both agrees. The US would agree that they don't add sanctions, nuclear sanctions, nuclear-related sanctions, and also we are not going to go to 90% or installing new centrifuges. Thus, this would be the second step, freeze for freeze. But that's not the goal in itself. Then there's a third step, which is a longer and a stronger deal, which President Biden has called for and what many Iranians wanted too. They want a longer and a stronger deal. And the argument inside Iran is we are better off to go for a longer and a stronger deal while we have the so-called strategic assets in our control, meaning extra enriched uraniums. While we have them, we are better off to go for the longer and the stronger deal, rather than give them away in the JCPOA, revival of the JCPOA, and then go for the longer and the stronger deal. Then on the other side, we will not be under any pressure, but we will be under the pressure. Thus, that's the argument of those who want the alternative. Though I have articulated these points myself, but I'm not ready to go for this alternative now. For the next 2 months, I would do my best to go for the revival of the JCPOA. Thank you.
Thank you, Nasser. And with this, I will have to say that we are unfortunately at the end of our session. It went by very quickly, and I know that the goal was to cover a lot of ground. We obviously could do a separate session for each of the topics that we marginally discussed, but I think we really got a lot covered, and I would want to thank really our experts and our panelists for joining us and for being so frank and having candid responses to the audience question. I hope that we will be able to do a follow-up session, and I really value these conversations as they provide a unique perspective from inside Iran. So thank you again from RUSI and from ISPI, and hopefully see you very soon.
Thank you.